I still remember the exact moment my life split in two, the day I was fired. Not just any ordinary firing, but the kind that burns into your memory like acid. The room was bright, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the kind that makes every scratch, every bead of sweat, and every judgmental stare painfully visible. I was standing at the center of the conference room, my hands trembling just enough to betray my panic, while the entire team, my friends, smiled like they were watching a circus. "Mark," my manager said, leaning back in his chair with that smug, self-satisfied grin. "We've decided your contributions here aren't worth the effort anymore." It was supposed to be private, I guess, but with the way everyone's eyes were trained on me, it felt like the stadium lights of humiliation were shining directly on my face. I felt the words before I heard them, like they had already seeped into my skin. Publicly fired. Laughter. That's what really did it. First a quiet snicker from Lisa in accounting, then a louder chuckle from Jerome, and then the whole team joined in. Every snide whisper, every good riddance, every sly smirk felt like a dagger being twisted inside me. I could feel my chest tighten, my throat closing, but I forced myself to nod politely, murmuring the obligatory, "Thank you for the opportunity," knowing full well I'd never set foot in that office again. Walking out of that building, the air felt different, heavy, like it was pressing down on me, squeezing me. I wanted to scream, to storm back in and throw their smug faces to the ground, but I couldn't. So instead, I left, and with every step away from that building, I promised myself one thing. I'd come back. And when I did, they'd finally see. The first few months after losing the job were the hardest. I moved into a tiny apartment in the outskirts of the city, the kind where the walls are thin enough to hear your neighbors argue, but thick enough that no one would hear my screams. Money was tight. I took odd jobs, freelance consulting, some tech repair work, even dog walking once, but every penny I earned went straight back into learning. I devoured books on business strategy, entrepreneurship, marketing, and leadership. I watched people rise and fall in real time through news stories, and I studied them like a predator tracking prey. It was during one of those long, lonely nights, staring at the glow of my laptop in the dark, that the idea hit me. They think they've won. They think I'm done. They're wrong. I started small, investing what little I had into a tech startup I could co-found with a friend I trusted implicitly. Someone who believed in me when no one else did. We called it Nexus Solutions. First, it was brutal. I remember nights when the electricity got cut off, and I had to work on my laptop at a friend's house just to keep the momentum going. Clients laughed at my proposals. Investors ignored my emails, and failure became a constant companion. But every rejection, every insult, every "you'll never make it" became fuel. By the end of the first year, Nexus Solutions wasn't making headlines yet, but we were moving. We were slowly, quietly building something that mattered. The kind of foundation you can't see from the outside but holds everything up when the storm comes. I learned to spot opportunities where others saw none, to negotiate with a ruthlessness I never thought I possessed, and to push my team, my real team this time, to reach heights I knew we could. But I didn't stop there. I studied my old company too. Not obsessively, not in a way that would have gotten me arrested, but enough to understand its weak points, its blind spots, its vulnerabilities. I watched them grow complacent, watched the arrogance build in that office where I'd once been humiliated. I watched Jerome fumble a major project, Lisa mishandle her accounts, and my old manager, oh, I knew him better than anyone, start to make decisions based on ego rather than logic. Every small victory for me felt like a quiet whisper of revenge. Not the petty kind, but the one that comes from proving yourself, from building an empire silently while the people who doubted you sink into their own mediocrity. And yet, even as I built my life, there were moments when doubt crept in. Nights when I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had the patience, the endurance, the sheer stubbornness to pull this off. The temptation to lash out, to burn everything down, to confront them immediately. It was almost unbearable. But I knew deep down that the moment for that would come. And when it did, it would be perfect. By year 3, Nexus Solutions had gone from a scrappy startup to a serious contender in the tech world. Our software was innovative, our client base was expanding, and investors who had once laughed at me were now seeking my attention. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had gone from being a public embarrassment to someone whose signature on a contract could move millions. And all the while, I kept my eyes on the prize, the very company that had spat me out like garbage. I remember the day I first drove past the old office building. My chest tightened, not with anger this time, but with a strange mixture of anticipation and satisfaction. Everything looked the same from the outside, the same logo, the same glass doors, the same smug receptionists, but I saw it differently. I saw vulnerability. I saw opportunity. I saw the playground where I had once been humiliated, now primed for a reckoning that would make history. It wasn't just about money, though. It was about proving to myself and to them that I wasn't defined by one moment of public shame. That a person's worth isn't decided by a boardroom full of smug faces laughing at your expense. That resilience, patience, intelligence, and vision matter more than arrogance and cruelty. As I watched The Office from the car that day, I allowed myself a small, private smile. I was ready, but first, there was more work to do. I threw myself into the next few years with the same intensity one had when I started Nexus. I studied mergers, acquisitions, market trends, and valuation reports. I networked with investors who could provide the capital needed to make a move against my old company. I polished my image, built a reputation as a ruthless yet brilliant entrepreneur, and crafted every detail of my eventual return. I became the kind of man who could walk into that office, look every single one of my former tormentors in the eye, and watch the recognition and fear cross their faces. There were setbacks, of course. Deals that fell through, partnerships that dissolved unexpectedly, and moments when I questioned whether all this effort was worth it. But then I would remember the conference room, the laughter, the humiliation, and I'd push myself harder. Every late night, every failed pitch, every financial headache became a step on a staircase that led directly back to them. By the 5th year, Nexus Solutions had become a force. We had innovative products, a growing client base, and a valuation that made even seasoned investors raise their eyebrows. But my ultimate plan required more than just business success. It required precise timing, calculated moves, and patience so fine it bordered on obsession. And then the opportunity came. An executive at my old company had made a series of disastrous decisions. The stock price was vulnerable, the board was fracturing, and the company was ripe for acquisition. I assembled a team of financial experts, legal advisors, and strategic consultants who were as ruthless and meticulous as I was. Together, we crafted a plan that would allow me to acquire the company quietly, efficiently, and with absolute control. Every step brought me closer to the moment I had been building toward for nearly a decade. Every strategy, every sleepless night, every calculated risk was part of a master plan that would culminate in a single unforgettable day. The day I would walk through those glass doors not as the embarrassed, laughed-at employee, but as the millionaire CEO with the power to redefine everything. Yet, even with all the planning, I couldn't shake the feeling of nervous anticipation. It was different from the fear I'd felt the day I was fired. This was the thrill of a long-awaited victory, the tension before a storm, the quiet before a roar. I knew the look on their faces would be priceless. I knew Jerome's jaw would drop, Lisa's smug smile would falter, and my old manager would realize, perhaps too late, that the student had not only survived, but had surpassed the master. And deep down, I also knew this revenge without growth is empty. My triumph would be complete not because of the humiliation they suffered, but because of the life I had built, the empire I had created, and the man I had become in the process. I sat in my office that night, looking at the city skyline, and allowed myself one thought. Tomorrow, everything changes. Tomorrow, they see who really won. And with that, I leaned back, letting the weight of anticipation and triumph wash over me, knowing that every step of the journey had led to this moment. The first step toward reclaiming everything they tried to take from me. The morning I walked back into that building, everything felt surreal. The glass doors reflected the skyline behind me, but for a moment, I hardly noticed the city. My eyes were fixed on the entrance, on the lobby, on the space where my humiliation had been so vividly engraved in my memory. And yet I was calm. collected. Everything about me now spoke of authority and success. The tailored suit, the quiet confidence, the aura of someone who could command a room without raising his voice. I pushed the doors open and stepped inside. The reception area hadn't changed much. The same beige carpeting, the same glossy magazines on the coffee table, the same receptionist who probably still thought of me as the awkward guy who couldn't measure up. I smiled politely. "Good morning," I said, my tone warm but carrying an unmistakable weight. She looked up, blinked, and then quickly returned to her screen. But I caught it in her eyes, the flicker of recognition, the hesitation, the subtle shift from casual dismissal to cautious awareness. That tiny moment of acknowledgement sent a thrill straight to my chest. I didn't need her to remember my past. I just needed her to know I was no longer the man they had laughed at. Minutes later, I was in the boardroom. The same room. The same long, polished table where I had once been made a spectacle. Jerome was there first, his posture stiff, fingers drumming nervously on the table. Lisa arrived next, her trademark confident smile a little too tight, a little too rehearsed. And then my old manager entered, clipboard in hand, the faint trace of authority in his gait now marred by uncertainty. They didn't know I was there yet. I could feel the tension in the room, the way the air seemed to thicken. And I let them wait. Silence, after all, is a tool more powerful than words. "Good morning," I said finally, stepping fully into view. Their heads turned, eyes widening as recognition dawned, then faltered. Jerome's mouth opened, then closed again, unsure whether to speak. Lisa's expression wavered between confusion and incredulity. My old manager's face went pale, and I could almost hear the gears turning in his mind, desperately trying to rationalize my presence. "I see some familiar faces," I continued, letting a slow, deliberate smile spread across my face. "It's been a long time." The silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable. I allowed it to linger, feeling the shift in power. This wasn't the Mark they had mocked. This wasn't the nervous, insecure guy who had been shown the door. This was a man who had rebuilt his life, his career, and his worth, quietly but meticulously, while they had remained comfortably mediocre. "I imagine you have questions," I said, moving toward the head of the table and taking a seat. "But before we get into that, let me just say thank you. Thank you for underestimating me, for laughing at me, for telling me I'd never succeed. It's because of that I'm here today." Jerome finally found his voice. "Mark, what are you doing here? How did I get here?" I interrupted gently, letting a small chuckle escape. "It's simple. I worked. I planned. I didn't let your opinions define me. And now?" I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the room, fixing on each of them individually. "I get to lead." The shock on their faces was almost delicious. Jerome's confidence, once so unshakable, wavered. Lisa's carefully constructed poise faltered, and my old manager's eyes darted nervously to the documents in his hand, as if trying to find some reason why I wasn't in charge. But there was none. I had made sure of it. I had orchestrated everything, the acquisition, the timing, the board approvals, the legal hurdles, so that no one could contest it. In a matter of hours, the company they had built their arrogance on would belong to me, and they would realize, finally, that the underdog they mocked was now the one with the power to shape their fates. The next few weeks were intense. I moved through the company with precision, meeting with department heads, understanding operations, and quietly implementing changes. But I did it carefully, never rashly, never in a way that would draw unnecessary resistance. I wanted them to feel the shift slowly, painfully, until the moment of total realization hit them like a thunderclap. Jerome was the first to break. He came into my temporary office one morning, trying to assert dominance as if we were peers, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. "Mark, this can't be real. You can't just—" "I can," I said calmly, letting the words hang in the air. "And I have. For years I built this. I prepared for this. And now you and we're on different sides." Lisa tried to undermine me next. She circulated rumors, whispered to colleagues, tried to sow doubt and confusion. But I had anticipated it. Each rumor was countered, each whisper neutralized, each subtle attempt at sabotage addressed before it could take root. I wasn't just reacting, I was orchestrating. Every move they made, every attempt to intimidate, only highlighted their desperation. Meanwhile, I focused on growth. I injected new energy into the company, brought in fresh ideas, modernized outdated systems, and personally mentored promising employees. People who had once been invisible were now thriving, their loyalty shifting toward me. Slowly, imperceptibly, the culture was changing. And with it, the walls of arrogance and complacency that my old team had built began to crumble. The emotional weight of it all was intense. I caught myself lingering in moments of reflection, thinking about the years lost, the humiliation, the anger that had driven me. But I also felt something new: pride, satisfaction, and the quiet thrill of justice served not through cruelty, but through success. I was no longer consumed by the past. I was defined by the present, by what I had achieved, and by the control I now wielded. Then came the moment of confrontation. It was a company-wide meeting, the kind where everyone gathers to hear important updates. I stepped onto the stage, looked out at the crowd, and there they were, the people who had once laughed at me, now forced to sit quietly as I addressed the room. "Good morning, everyone," I began, letting my gaze drift over familiar faces. "I want to start by saying thank you for your hard work, for your dedication, and for the lessons you taught me years ago." Confusion rippled through the audience. My old manager's lips pressed into a thin line, Jerome fidgeted, and Lisa's eyes darted around nervously. I let the silence build, every second magnifying the tension. Some of you remember me as the guy who was fired, the one who struggled, who was underestimated. I won't lie, that was a hard day, but it taught me something crucial: resilience, preparation, vision. And today, I stand before you not as the employee you laughed at, but as the CEO of this company. Gasps, whispers, and stunned expressions filled the room. I let it sink in, relishing the slow dawning of realization. Faces turned pale. Colleagues who had once ignored me now looked at me with a mixture of awe and fear. Jerome's jaw tightened. Lisa's posture stiffened. My old manager looked as if the ground had vanished beneath him. "This isn't just about me," I continued, my voice firm but calm. "It's about all of us. About building a company we can be proud of. About creating opportunities, fostering talent, and achieving results that matter. But it's also about accountability. About understanding that arrogance, cruelty, and underestimation have consequences." By the end of the meeting, the transformation was evident. I had won more than power, I had won respect. Even those who had mocked me couldn't deny it. And in the quiet aftermath, as people returned to their desks, I felt a profound sense of closure. The scars of the past were still there, yes, but they had been replaced by something stronger: validation, achievement, and undeniable proof that I had risen above. That night, I walked through the office alone, touching the furniture, glancing at the conference room, and remembering the humiliation, the laughter, the disbelief. But instead of anger, I felt gratitude for the journey, for the lessons, for the resilience that had brought me here. And as I left the building that night, I allowed myself a private, satisfied thought. The student had surpassed the masters. And in doing so, not only had I avenged myself, I had transformed a painful past into a triumphant present, paving the way for a future that I would define on my terms. The days after the company-wide announcement were surreal. Walking through the halls, I saw the same faces, the same people who had once mocked me, now treating me with the kind of cautious respect that borders on awe. Jerome avoided eye contact entirely. Lisa's forced smiles were brittle, and my old manager hovered like a shadow, unsure whether to approach or retreat. But the best part? I didn't need to do anything. The power wasn't in my words or my presence. It was in the reality that I had created. I had built an empire quietly, and now the empire itself spoke louder than any threats, excuses, or arrogance ever could. Yet, for all the satisfaction, there was more work to do. Revenge is a sweet word, but it is hollow without legacy, and I was determined to leave one. I threw myself into reshaping the company culture entirely. Departments that had been stagnant under bureaucratic inefficiency were now agile, collaborative, and innovative. I personally mentored young talent, giving them opportunities one had been denied. Each success became a testament not only to my growth but also to the failure of those who had underestimated me. I could see it in their faces every time a new idea I approved flourished, every time a team that had once been ignored exceeded expectations. But the tension wasn't gone. Jerome attempted subtle sabotage, slowing down reports, misdirecting project deadlines, but each attempt was carefully mitigated by the systems I'd implemented. Lisa tried to rally a few loyal colleagues into whisper campaigns and backchannel criticisms. My old manager, well, he tried to negotiate with me, appealing to experience and tradition. But I listened politely and then reminded him that the world had changed. The seat he had once arrogantly occupied was now mine, and there was no going back. Then came the moment that truly defined the culmination of all those years of planning. The company's board called for an emergency meeting, concerned about market competition and sudden structural changes. I entered the boardroom, calm, prepared, and utterly in control. Jerome fidgeted at the far end. Lisa's veneer cracked like old paint, and my old manager clutched his notes as if they were lifelines. "Gentlemen, ladies," I began, voice firm yet composed, "I know change is never easy. I also know that people resist when their comfort is challenged. But our future depends on adaptability, foresight, and the courage to embrace new ideas. I've built this company not to repeat mistakes of the past, but to redefine what success means. For all of us." The words hit them slowly. You could see comprehension dawning, but it was tinted with something else: fear. They realized they were no longer operating from a position of control. They were witnesses to a reality they had never anticipated. The underdog was in charge. And then, the twist I had been planning for years. I announced a major strategic acquisition that positioned the company in a new, lucrative market. It was bold, visionary, and undeniably successful. My former colleagues, who had once laughed at my ideas, now had no choice but to acknowledge them, and me. Jerome's resignation came first, silent but filled with quiet humiliation. Lisa followed, realizing that her manipulations and ego couldn't compete with sustained competence and foresight. My old manager lingered a bit longer, then finally accepted a consulting role, the authority he once wielded reduced to a fraction of what it had been. Walking through the office after the storm settled, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Not the reckless, vengeful thrill I had imagined as a kid, but something far deeper. The satisfaction of having turned every insult, every humiliation, every ounce of doubt into a life I had designed on my terms. The revenge wasn't in punishment. It was in excellence, in mastery, in proving to myself and to the world that I was more than capable. And yet, amidst all this, there was something even more rewarding. Seeing the employees flourish under a culture of respect, encouragement, and ambition. The interns who had once been ignored were now leading projects. Teams that had once been fractured were innovating like never before. I realized, in that moment, that true victory isn't measured by the downfall of others. It's measured by the uplift you create, the lives you touch, and the legacy you leave behind. Weeks later, I found myself back in that same lobby, reflecting on how far I had come. The receptionist, who had once barely acknowledged me, smiled genuinely now. "Good morning, Mr. Kane," she said. The sound of my name spoken with respect, without fear or mockery, sent a warmth through me that no amount of wealth could ever replicate. I paused for a moment, looking around at the space that had once been a chamber of humiliation. I could almost hear the echoes of past laughter, but now they seemed distant, irrelevant. What mattered was the empire I had built, the respect I had earned, and the people whose lives I had improved, not just my own. That night, as I sat in my office overlooking the city skyline, I allowed myself a rare moment of vulnerability. The journey had been long, hard, and lonely at times, but it had transformed me. I wasn't the same man who had been fired, mocked, and dismissed. I was stronger, wiser, and more capable than I had ever imagined. And in the quiet solitude of that night, I finally forgave. Not the people who had humiliated me, but the circumstances that had forced me to discover my own strength. In that moment, I realized the ultimate truth. Success tastes sweeter when it comes from resilience, from vision, and from perseverance. Revenge may have been the spark, but it was growth, transformation, and mastery that had fueled the fire. I leaned back in my chair, taking a deep breath, and smiled. I had won in every way that truly mattered. The past was no longer a chain, it was a foundation. And the future? Well, the future was mine. If there's one thing I've learned from this journey, it's that no humiliation, no setback, no doubt can define you, unless you allow it. Strength comes from persistence, vision, and the courage to act when no one believes in you. And if you take those lessons to heart, you can create your own victories no matter what the world throws at you. So, if you've enjoyed walking this path with me, seeing how a life rebuilt from ashes can rise higher than ever before, then stick around. Subscribe for more stories of resilience, triumph, and transformation, and witness how ordinary people can achieve the extraordinary when they refuse to be defined by anyone else's limitations.